Hello and welcome to the final entry in our series on the War in Heaven. Now that the war is pretty much over, or rather an afterthought in history, we'll be looking at the post-war universe. So without further ado, let's begin. When the Eighth Doctor emerged from his century-long exile on Earth after destroying Romana III's Gallifrey, he discovered that Gallifrey and the Time Lords had now been completely wiped from history. Despite this, there still existed 4 remaining Time Lords, though they were forced by their new circumstances to remove their second hearts that were connecting them to their disappeared world. Several other groups from the war survived its ending, including Faction Paradox and the Mayakai. While there were only 4 elementals, as they were dubbed, the Doctor encountered other Gallifreyan survivors such as Chloe, Erasmus, and Marnell. It was implied that Romana had managed to survive and live on to regenerate a 4th time, despite the obliteration of her Gallifrey. After the destruction of Gallifrey, temporal tourism into earlier years of its history became popular, though it was a risky hobby. Tourism into the war era itself was inadvisable, however, and increasingly difficult as the war kept reiterating and looping on itself as the Time Lords and the enemy tried to undercut each other, becoming shorter and more violent each time. Emboldened by their new knowledge, several groups or individuals went so far as to try to fill the void left by the Time Lords by seizing control of history, a race for the throne of time, if you will. The Oneir scavenged fragments of time travel technology for thousands of years in their quest to discover the secrets of it and become the Lords of Time. Sabbath Day stole the Eighth Doctor's second heart to gain some Time Lord abilities, and he planned to use them to replace Gallifrey and the Time Lords with Earth and humanity. In their own quest to become the new Lords of Time, the Council of Eight eliminated their enemies from their fortress in the Time Vortex, by manipulating both Sabbath and the Doctor. However, they were defeated by the Doctor working together with Sabbath and Miranda, the daughter of the Emperor of the 4 surviving elementals. The Daleks, often previously assumed to be the enemy, rose to prominence in the Time Lord's absence, crossing paths with the Doctor, Fitz and Trix several times. They monitored the Council of Eight's affairs and watched the destruction of the Time Station, plotting how they could take advantage of events for their own ends. The Doctor foiled their attempt to exterminate the Pope of 2097 on a visit to Mars, a crucial nexus point of human history. After suffering from amnesia for several years, the Eighth Doctor foresaw, and encountered evidence of, a distant future of the post-war universe in which, although Gallifrey was not restored, he and the other Time Lords regained control of the universe and attempted to stabilize it. Assembled as the Imperial family, the 4 surviving elementals ruled over all of time and space from the Needle. The identities of the 4 were the Emperor, really the Doctor, the man with the rosette, really the Master, the man with the bent nose, really the Minister of Chance, and the woman with long blonde hair, really either Romana or Iris Wildtime. The Clade blamed them for draining the universe of energy by starting the war, and after several centuries of conflict, the Clade revolted and overthrew the family. However, this did not stop at the end of the universe. By the time Miranda Dawkins became Empress of the Needle, there were no stars left in the sky, and the energy drain left everything in a dying void. In the time of the Empress, the universe was still a grey void, and all surviving planets were freezing cold. Entire sections of the universe and its timeline were simply missing. The boy from Faction Paradox had once told the Eighth Doctor a greyness would fall over reality around the time of the Needle. The Infinity Doctor saw the Needle was the final structure of life in a grey starless void. The Council of Eight were the most successful of the post-war era's new powers in creating their own web of time. Their manipulations took advantage of reality's instability to investigate a multiverse collapse, which briefly led to the Council's timeline as the only reality in existence. Once the Doctor's amnesia had cleared, he realised that in the last moments before he destroyed Gallifrey, he had deleted his memories and downloaded the Matrix, including the minds of all the Time Lords. Marnell made him promise to restore the Time Lords and build a city for the saved, and to this end, the Doctor sent K9 to Espero. There, Madame Jing had previously offered to restore his memories, something which the Doctor had now realised would cause the Matrix in his mind to be deleted unless he managed to restore it first. Despite this risk, Marnell believed the Doctor would go on to make good on his vow. Indeed, the Eighth Doctor had previously glimpsed in the Tomorrow Windows a possible future in which the Time Lords were restored along with their homeworld. Also among his possible futures, albeit one less certain than the timeline where he became the commonly accepted Ninth Doctor, was a timeline where he was known to become a listless-looking man. This possible version of the Ninth Doctor coexisted with a version of the Master, both of them flying their TARDISes freely and believing the universe to be secure enough that the Doctor could consider retirement. According to some accounts, the faction in the war who'd created the Quedgen, the Time Lords, indeed survived beyond W-time and returned to having great influence over the universe from Gallifrey. Now calling themselves the Superiors, they inaugurated the new era of V-time and eliminated their wartime enemies' lingering influence on reality via a surgical procedure on the regen imp soldier Chris Quedge. When the Eighth Doctor looked into the Tomorrow windows, he saw that his most probable future was to become a Ninth Doctor with big ears and a hawk-like face. When this Ninth Doctor met Rose Tyler, he recounted to her how he was the last of his kind following a time war, with the Doctor having been forced to destroy his planet to put an end to said war. The 10th Doctor continued to consider himself the last of the Time Lords, recounting to Martha Jones how his planet was gone. Although most accounts depicted these events in the Doctor's life as following on from the last great Time War against the Daleks, with the Doctor's destruction of Gallifrey under discussion having occurred in circumstances involving a weapon called the Moment, at a time when Rassilon's High Council were in charge of Gallifreyan forces, one account showed that the memory of Gallifrey's destruction at his hand, which haunted the 10th Doctor, was the 8th Doctor's memory of destroying Romana's Gallifrey, not the 8th Doctor's destruction of Rassilon's Gallifrey or the War Doctor's. Historians who studied the Daleks understood that the Time War had rewritten the history of the universe such that it was not the same as the one that had first felt the winds of change. The Ninth Doctor also declared the universe we knew was gone after the Time War. The war had thrown up a bewildering jumble of alternate realities and superfluous timelines, such that no one could tell what had actually happened and what was now fantasy. With the war time locked away from reality, even the events of the conflict itself seemed uncertain. For the surviving Daleks, everything they had ever known was in flux, their past having changed forever. With many changes to time, the Time Lords were unable to remember the full story of the Time War, with one author writing that nobody was certain how the conflict even began. The 13th Doctor admitted she was unable to remember much of the War Doctor's life, though much of that could have been from the shame of it. While numerous accounts indicated the post-war universe and the multiverse based around it was the only reality in existence, this was not necessarily the case. When exposed to anti-time, the 8th Doctor of the Positive Time universe saw a prime universe where the Time Lords had ceased to exist. Time wound backwards to eliminate their every trace. Additionally, he described seeing a planet Earth where he plucked out one of his own hearts. One lower indicated that the War in Heaven timeline had not actually been erased when Gallifrey was destroyed, and the existence known to the surviving elementals was a result of them falling from the War in Heaven, crashing to the lesser species and having their timelines rot into thorned patchworks of broken memories. And that was the War in Heaven, a conflict I still even now don't fully understand, and I don't really think that you're meant to. Compared to the gritty sci-fi of the Time War, this is fantasy, with death cults and blood rituals, not cold hard technology, and that's the beauty of it. The war will never truly end. Thanks to the efforts of Archbeetle and others, stories within it will continue to be told, and this video will become outdated very quickly. But that doesn't mean it'll be untrue. The foundational stories are still there, and they're the ones that make up the most of the war, the most major of pieces. But anyways guys, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed, then consider leaving a like and subscribing down below, as it really helps out the channel. And if you do subscribe, then make sure to click the little bell and turn on notifications so you're notified when more of my videos come out. But as always, thanks for watching.